The release of the U-Phase Legacy DLC saw a suspicious absence of one thing, and that is the time-honored tradition of Redditors complaining about the new civs being OP to drive up sales. This was because the Jin Dynasty released in a state that was actually pretty damn weak, while at the same time being tricky to play, so it was really hard for people to get some wins early on. It was actually so underpowered that it would have not seen any players in the first major tournament, that was the Homestead Cup, that we saw just a week after release. The devs however reacted quite quickly here and released a patch significantly buffing especially the weakest aspect of the Jin Dynasty, that is the Mohi Tribesmen. Since they can now be expected to roughly stay at this strength level for at least the foreseeable future, I think it's worth taking a look at how strong they are now, which is what this video is going to be about. Comparing their stats to the Archer, we can see that they are quite similar at first glance. They have the same baseline attack damage, attack range and attack speed. They also both don't have any armor at all. They have similar bonus damage structure in that they both deal 5 bonus damage to Janissaries and deal bonus damage to light melee infantry. Mohi Tribesmen deal 7 instead of 5 bonus damage there. There's also +1 damage versus range, which I think is not to overlook and helps the Mohi Tribesmen in quite a few matchups. Now the big differences here of course are the lower HP by 10, which makes them quite squishy, and of course the much increased movement speed thanks to them being mounted. Now this comes at a quite increased price tag, where they cost about 20% more than a regular archer and also take 2 seconds longer to build. On the whole, they also don't need a lot of wood, so you're gonna run out of food faster than other civs if you spam a lot of these. They're also built at the stable and not at the archery range, which can actually make it a lot easier to combine them either with Horsemen or with the Iron Pagoda. They also benefit from the horse bonuses in that they can be built instantaneously if you have horses left over and get a slight HP buff as a passive for each horse that is available. The Mohi Tribesman is not an additional unit that you get, but it replaces the archer. This makes it unique from all the other ranged cavalry units in the game, which are usually added either later in the game or just in a few age as an addition to the archers. For example, if you play Mongols, you can choose to play a much more traditional style with Keshiks and archers and maybe add some spears in, or you can go for Mangudai and with that for the more harassment oriented style, like the annoying little Mongol main that you are. When playing the Jin Dynasty, you do not have the choice between one or the other. You have both of those kinds of units and playstyles merged into one, pretty much whether you like it or not. This fact becomes one of the defining features of how to play the Jin Dynasty in the feudal age in particular, as the archer is a very key unit for basically every civ in the feudal age. For this video, we're gonna analyze the Mohi Tribesmen to see in which situations they succeed in replacing the archers and where they fail. First up, we're gonna look at the matchup of archers versus the Mohi Tribesmen. The increased cost means that the archers will be in a numbers advantage compared to the Mohi Tribesmen, which in this head-to-head fight is a pretty significant advantage, and the mobility that the Mohi Tribesman has does not come into play at all. That means if you go into an archer versus archer battle with the Jin Dynasty, you better be outnumbering your opponents significantly, but if you do manage to do that, you can chase the opponent's archers down and kill them because they can't get away. The archers winning in a straight-up fight is not really a surprise. Archers are the easiest way to counter ranged cavalry units, so the Mohi Tribesmen losing to them is kinda expected. The problem with this was, however, that prior to the most recent hotfix, the Mohi Tribesmen did quite poorly against other ranged cavalry units. For example, there was a Reddit thread that raised the issue of Mangudai simply being able to win in an even resourced fight against the Mohi Tribesmen. And at that point, what are you supposed to do? You can't really go for the regular archer because you don't have it. But now that the Mohi Tribesmen have buffed, we can see they win against the Mangudai, so at least on that front, things are better. However, we should look at some more ranged cavalry matchups here, I think, and I'm just going to put 2 of those together. Here we have the Camel archers as well as the Akinji. The Camel archers are from Abbasid, the Akinji are from Ottoman. They actually recently got a buff in that they are now more easily available to Ottoman and may just be seeing more frequent usage in the games that are on the ladder right now. Also because Ottoman is just kind of busted as hell right now. But as you can see, archers pretty straightforwardly win against the Akinji, having slightly less than half of the total HP left. Against the Camel archers, the archers do even better with slightly more than half the HP left. Exactly as one would expect. If we now repeat this match, but with the Mohi Tribesmen instead of archers, we get actually quite a significantly different result here. At first, we see that the Akinji die quite quickly, and I think because the Akinji themselves are quite weak, the +1 range damage causes them to die very fast and as a result just not do as much damage. So that fight actually ends quicker than against the archers and with more HP left over for the Mohi Tribesmen. However, if you can look at the top half of the screen, that fight is still going on. And honestly, it's not even looking good. And as we're about to see in a second here, the Camel archers, they straight up win. The regular archers won that with more than half the HP left. The reason for this is the so-called Camel Unease debuff aura. Camels in AoE 4 have a debuff aura that causes other horse-based cavalry units to have a 20% damage debuff attached to them whenever there's a camel nearby, which for most archers is not a factor at all, as they are not mounted. However, there are a number of units in the feudal age that are camel-based and ranged that are supposed to be countered by the archers, but if the only archer option is mounted, that means you're always facing the debuff. This is kind of a weird situation for the Mohui tribesmen, as they still have to try and fight these camels, but they don't do nearly as good a job there as they do against other ranged cavalry. And if you've ever played against AoB, you know how much of a pain these desert raiders can be, particularly when they get healed by the feudal age dervishes that they sometimes get. Like, you can't snipe them down nearly as easily because you and archers just don't deal the same damage because you're playing Jin Dynasty. So yeah, being mounted isn't always an advantage, and we should keep that in mind because it's gonna come up later again. It is, however, an advantage sometimes, as we can see from this clip of just units trying to run away from horsemen. I sped up the side of the Mohui tribesmen on the right by ×2 just to get a roughly equal speed here. Horsemen have a movement speed of 1.87, whereas the Mohui tribesmen run at 1.6, so the horsemen will still regularly catch up and deal quite a bit of damage to these guys as they deal bonus damage to ranged units. They do, however, can run for much further distance while losing relatively minimal amounts of HP compared to the regular archer. So fleeing from horsemen is a possibility, but it's not free. Now, what happens if we don't just run away? Stutter stepping is something that's pretty common in an RTS game, really, because well, it's kind of an effective way to get more usefulness out of your ranged units, but also it requires APM. You need to pay attention to your units, so it's not quite free, but oftentimes you don't have anything better to do than try to get the most out of your units. And I've tried this here against some horsemen, both with the Mohui tribesmen and with the archers, and to my surprise I thought they'd be better at this because of the higher movement speed, but they actually die quite a bit faster than the regular archers. And not just that, in the end, the stutter stepping archers, which I led both units in a circle to kind of limit their movement area a little bit. In the end, the archers don't win either, but they almost kill the second horseman, whereas the Mohui tribesmen died before killing even the first one, which, is a pretty intense difference. Now, to round out the third scenario where you don't micro either unit, they die very fast, so not really much of a surprise that the archers kind of deal a little bit more damage to the horsemen, but it's not that big a difference. So in the end, the lesson to learn there, I think, is if your archers are caught out in the open, stutter step them backwards to kill as many horsemen as possible. But if you have Mohui tribesmen and they are caught out in the open, run them away from whatever horsemen or knights are chasing them, because they can probably do a decent job taking only minimal damage while getting away. Another key role of the archer in the feudal age is countering spearmen. As you might be able to tell, in theory you can kill an infinite amount of spearmen with the Mohui tribesmen without ever taking damage. However, in practice, especially charging spearmen aren't that much slower than the Mohui tribesmen, so you have to be kinda careful. I think it's also noteworthy that archers can quite successfully kite spearmen without taking that much damage. As you see here, me even screwing up slightly means that the damage taken on the Mohui tribesmen is kinda similar to that on the archers. Although, if you do a better job microing here than I do, then you won't have this. However, if you do a bad job microing, and I've done this plenty of times in my ranked games so far, if you let your Mohui tribesmen run into spears unmicroed, boy, they die. And they die fast. You get punished so hard here. Like, the best possible scenario is you take 0 damage. The worst possible scenario, where you don't micro your ranged units, is far more acceptable for the archers than for the Mohui tribesmen. And this is like another one of those downsides of being mounted. Spearmen deal massive amounts of bonus damage to you. Speaking of bonus damage, we also have to address the Quilted Armor upgrade, which is available from the feudal age onwards, which helps the Mohui tribesmen survive both the horsemen and the spearmen for quite a bit longer. It cuts the bonus damage that they do in half, and since like about 3/4 of the damage that the spearmen do is bonus damage, this is actually quite significant. We could just see that the spearmen there killed 1 Mohui tribesman less than without the upgrade, so it does have an impact. And the difference, I think, is also significant here against these Horsemen, as the slower killing of the Mohi Tribesmen causes them to, just perform better in combat overall. They still are countered by these units if they get in contact, but on the whole, it takes them about 1 auto attack more to kill a Mohi Tribesman, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in practice, in my experience, it does add up quite a bit, if you can afford the upgrade. Another minor role that the archers fulfill in the Castle Age is that they want to counter the crossbows. The crossbows often threaten the more valuable knights or men-at-arms that are combined with the archers, and you want to focus down those crossbows as soon as possible to give the heavy units the time and space that they need to actually deal their damage. And we can see here the Mohi Tribesmen actually kill these crossbows faster than the archers, and their added mobility actually also makes it easier to get into range of these crossbows. So the +1 range damage and the mobility makes them better against crossbows, in my opinion. There are some other more oddball ranged units that the archers aren't really good against, but I've put some matchups here. The +1 range makes them better against ranged units generally speaking, but they still, they get eaten alive by Jugunu just as much as archers are, and the +1 range damage isn't enough to make them good against javelin throws. Meaning they're kinda equally bad as archers against these two specific units. Since we're talking Castle Age, here's some man-at-arms against the veteran Mohi Tribesmen. It's going as you would expect. The Mohi Tribesmen don't deal much damage to them at all, and the man-at-arms are, even slower than the spears, so technically out-microing them is easier and possible, but realistically, the amount of damage is so low that it takes forever to kill man-at-arms. Technically, you could kill them, but in practice, you're going to want to have crossbows by the time that there's a significant number of man-at-arms on the field. Another Castle Age unit is, of course, the Knight. Just for completion's sake, they do terribly against this. Other archers do too, this is expected. But again, at least as opposed to regular archers, you can run away from these with yet even more success than the Horsemen, because Knights are slightly slower than Horsemen. So for completion it's in here, but nothing really shocking about it. Going into an even later stage of the game, here with all university upgrades, Handcannons are kind of an important unit in the Imperial Age and post-Imperial Age, and one of the ways to counter them is to have enough archers nearby that you can focus them down quickly before they can get their full value. And well, the archers being cheaper kind of get more DPS onto the field here a little bit, but I think the mobility there actually is a factor to get into range and chase down the Handcannons and kill them for your opponent. That being said, the Mohi Tribesmen's lower HP causes them to lose quite a few more here against these Handcannons at even resources. Well, that was kind of the last matchup that I'm going to look at here today. I think there's some other things we need to mention here. The Mohi Tribesmen are really good at harassing the opponent. Like we mentioned it early on that they are similar to the Mangudai, but it is a huge advantage that you are able to go forward, snipe villagers and retreat with relative safety. But at the same time, you are overpaying for the Mohi Tribesmen compared to archers, and you're kind of getting an archer that is in most cases weaker than the real thing. So in order to make up for that resource gap, you have to do something with them. You kind of build them and you're immediately under pressure to harass your opponent, but at the same time, that harassment puts your opponent under pressure. So it's kind of a tense game for both players at that point. My personal recommendation for villager harass would be a group of 5 Mohi Tribesmen. They are not an overly significant resource investment, but with 5 you can 2-shot a villager exactly. That should be cost efficient and still like a minimal risk or worth it on the whole. Now, if you're playing against a Jin Dynasty player and you want to address the Mohi Tribesmen, you can play against them the same way you would counter Mangudai, that is archers, but also static defenses are very good against ranged cavalry units. They have low HP and the static defenses just immediately deal solid damage against them. Also, towers just are a good place for villagers to hide. Works against Mangudai, works against Mohi Tribesmen. Part of static defenses that work well against the Mohi Tribesmen are walls, because there's nothing cavalry units can do against stone walls. The Mohi Tribesmen in particular also are terrible even against palisade walls, because they can't torch them, and also, unlike archers, they can't even build ramps in theory, so there's static defenses just shut them down very well on the whole. That inability to build ramps comes into play not just against walls, primarily I think it's against players that go 2TC. You have a very hard time, in my experience, pushing into 2TC opponents with the Jin Dynasty, simply because you have fewer units that can actually build ramps for you and push into that enemy town center. Another thing is that in theory you would want to counter ranged units with mangonels, and One might think that the Moe tribesmen are better at dodging those than regular archers, and that's kind of true, of course, because of the increased movement speed, but in my testing, the difference didn't seem that big. Both of these kind of dodge the mangonel shots decently, but also get hit some of the time. There's a bit of RNG involved, depending on how the literal rocks fall. But yeah, in practice, you're gonna want to have some kind of unit to focus down that mangonel quickly, a horseman, an iron pagoda. Because yes, here you can dodge these shots very easily, but just like in a real game with archers, you're gonna get hit in a real fight, and it's gonna destroy your backline if you don't kill the mangonel quickly. So you're gonna want to have some kind of unit ready to counter those guys. In conclusion, the Moe Tribesman is a kind of high-risk, high-reward unit. You are paying a premium price for a very mobile unit here that can harass and pick off lone units of the opponent as well as the odd villager. At the same time, the increased price puts you under pressure to actually achieve that damage, because if you don't, you're just overpaying for an archer that is slightly worse than the real thing. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of these guys. They were very terrible before the last patch. They have gotten significantly better now, but honestly, if the next patch rolls around a couple of weeks from now, I'm not at all shocked if the Jin Dynasty gets another buff. Maybe not in the Mohe Tribesmen, maybe a reduction in cost of the Mohe Tribesmen, but I still think the Jin Dynasty is significantly underpowered. Not catastrophically bad like it was after release, but still. Not that it's not fun to play, I like playing them. I think they also look great, also like a lot of the concepts behind the civs, like the core of the civ is great. I just think that a lot of the numbers of the civ are still undertuned compared to how complicated and hard it is to play. But maybe that's just me, maybe I just can't handle it. Maybe we as a community haven't figured out how to use them properly yet, and I'm gonna eat my words like a month from now. But that's it from me. What do you think? Have I overlooked anything regarding the Mohe Tribesmen? Do you like them? Do you think they're better? Do you think they are worth the extra cost? Leave a comment down below. But for now, I'm Trash, CEO and founder of Trash Can Incorporated, and I'm out. See you around. Bye-bye.